The air over Kadena shimmered with heat and held the weight of a storm that hadn't broken yet. Even with the Typhoon swirling offshore, the tarmac pulsed with motion. Flight crews moved with the clipped urgency that lived in their bones. Steel canopies rattled overhead as final checks were called out in short, precise bursts. One crewman tossed a chalk across the concrete, narrowly missing a passing boot. Another flagged down a fuel truck weaving between rows of primed aircraft. The F-15C Eagles, lean and sharp against the gray sky, stood ready but still grounded. Orders had frozen launches for now, citing low ceiling visibility in a shifting wind corridor that refused to settle. No one liked waiting, but the rhythm of preparation continued because it was better than stillness. Callie walked alone, her steps even, her shoulders squared. The thick scent of hydraulic fluid clung to the air, mixed with the sharper edge of ozone and something else, distant salt, dragged in by the offshore wind. Her flight gloves hung from a carabiner, looped into her belt. She hadn't worn them in over a year, but they were always with her, creased and soft from years of use. Her name badge was clipped to her collar, scratched from age, and newly labeled with one word she hadn't asked for support. She didn't carry a headset. She carried a folded flight log instead, pressed flat and tucked beneath her left arm. It wasn't required for her role anymore, but she kept it out of habit. The corners had curled, and the paper had softened from touch, but the notations inside were crisp. Every time she stepped onto the tarmac, she brought it. A small act of refusal, no one noticed. Someone did glance up as she passed the edge of the southern pad. A young pilot in a polished flight suit leaned against a tow bar, sipping from a bottle of sports drink with a practiced kind of casual. He nudged the elbow of the man beside him. "Legacy's doing another lap," he said. The second man didn't look up. "She think we're handing out mercy rides today." Callie didn't turn. Her boots clicked against the concrete, even paced. Her hair was twisted tight, secured low at the nape of her neck. The wind caught a few loose strands, flicking them against her cheek. She didn't reach up to fix them. A group of maintenance officers passed by on her left, half jogging to the hangar bay. One of them lifted his arm and gave a quick, mock salute in her direction, grinning as he passed. Still observing, he called, "Or are you planning a takeoff from the clipboard?" She nodded once without pausing. The grin faltered but held. Farther down the line, under the shadow of an eagle's wing, a maintenance chief was shouting over the wind. His voice was swallowed and reshaped by the shifting gusts that slid in off the sea. The Typhoon was closer now. Not on them yet, but breathing on the outer edge of the island. You could feel it in your teeth. Callie stopped just inside the threshold of Hangar 3. Her eyes tracked the western edge of the sky. The wind was carving uneven bands across the low cloud layer. She followed their shape the way some people read maps. Something in the formation was wrong. Not dangerous. Exactly. But different. A seam was forming in the wind. A corridor. Inside the hangar, someone had left the radio open on a side bench. Scramble briefings played over the speaker, clipped and calm. Hold for interval spacing. Tower visibility at 200 meters. No launches authorized without executive override. Callie looked past the speaker, toward the stripped-down F-15 parked 2 lanes in. It was an older model, unarmed, with faded tail art still intact. No crew stood nearby. No manifest clipped to the board, probably staged from a heritage demo or temporary shift. But the fuel line was still connected, and the gear bay was sealed. She stepped closer and stopped. The paint on the tail caught a blade of light from the overhead flare. She recognized the mark. Juliet 4, her father's old bird. Behind her, the sound of laughter bounced off the steel ribs of the canopy. Another launch team passed, shouting over the wind. Someone tell her the storm's not going to part just for old bloodlines. Callie remained still. Her eyes tracked the wind again. It curled sideways now, in clean bands. She opened her flight log and ran her finger down a chart she'd updated the night before. She'd mapped it by hand, estimating wind direction, speed. Temperature split across altitudes. The corridor was real, but she didn't move. Not yet. The launch alarms echoed again. Another delay. The tower called in a new advisory. The pad crews rechecked tie-downs. The pilots stood near their birds, helmets in hand, annoyed but compliant. The hangar lights flickered under a sudden gust that rattled the equipment lockers and pushed hard against the glass. Callie closed her flight log and secured it beneath her arm. No one had called her name. No one ever did. But the wind was calling, and she understood its language better than most. The first time Callie ever saw an F-15 lift through a Typhoon wall, she was 8 years old, standing barefoot on the gravel beside a chain-link fence just south of the Okinawa perimeter. Her mother's gloved hand rested gently on her shoulder, steadying her not from danger, but from awe. The fighter tore upward through crosswinds that sent palm trees bowing sideways, and Callie remembered the way her chest filled as the afterburners cut through rain with a roar that seemed older than machines. Her father was in that jet. He didn't wave. He never waved when the weather got that close. But even from the ground, she could read his climb. Her family lived inside the base compound. Both her parents flew cyclone tracking flights, paired assignments that rotated between mapping cloud walls and skimming pressure bands too unstable for satellites. Her mother, Dana, had a pilot's calm that carried through every room she entered. Her father, Marcus, kept his flight logs in a cabinet beside the kitchen table. They never called it dangerous work. They called it necessary. On storm days, Dana would bring out a clear plastic overlay map and lay it on the floor. She would hand Callie a marker and ask her to trace the wind, not the forecast, the movement. Watch the edges, she'd say. The storm doesn't speak in the center. It speaks in the seams. Callie never forgot that line. The last flight her father took left during the late evening. No lights in the windows, no final hug. He was already zipped into his gear when she saw him on the line. A cold front had split early and the pressure dropped too fast for the command team to call it off. Dana watched from the hangar, lips pressed together, one hand holding her flight gloves, the other wrapped around the edge of a rusted stair rail. He didn't come back. They never recovered the aircraft, just a partial tail fin, washed ashore 6 days later. Dana retired from active flight within 2 months. She gave no reason and requested no ceremony. Their home stayed quiet. Callie watched the wind differently after that. Years later, when she joined the same training program, no one had to tell her what it meant to enter the airspace her parents once mapped. She never wore their patches. She kept her name off the legacy boards. She didn't speak about their records during interviews or use their stories as leverage. Still, everyone knew. It was in her file, in the way she handled the controls, in how she read wind direction without waiting for sensors. For a short time, they respected that. During her first 6 months, she ranked in the upper third of her sim class. One instructor called her mechanical, but clean. Another noted she responded faster to terrain wind shift than anyone he'd tracked in a year. She didn't outfly the field. She outread it. But then came the evil flights. She pulled throttle 3 seconds late on a mountain crosswind loop. She eased off climb during an overcast pitch instead of cutting through. She logged weather anomalies instead of pushing past them. Instructors didn't mark her as weak. They marked her as conservative. They used the word careful. Her slot was pulled from the scramble rotation the following quarter. No notice. Her name simply disappeared from the board one morning. A junior pilot whispered that she'd been reassigned to support due to flight hesitation. Another said it was politics. That legacy pressure made leadership cautious. Too many eyes. Not enough results. She didn't argue. She showed up the next day in the support section, clipboard in hand, gloves looped through her belt. The demotion was unspoken, but complete. Now she trained alone, after duty hours, while the others crowded into the rec tent or played cards under the shade canopy. Callie slipped into the data trailer with a thermos of cold tea and loaded old sim logs into a dusty terminal no one maintained. She didn't fly for scores. She flew corridors, mapped crosswinds, modeled split bands that didn't appear on radar yet. She printed telemetry data and used pens to sketch on the edges, circling anomalies in red ink. She wasn't trying to reclaim a flight slot. She was studying the storm itself. In the top drawer of her barracks locker, she kept a personal flight board. The ink had begun to fade. Her call sign had never been reprinted, but the paper was clean, not torn. She looked at it once each morning, not for nostalgia, for alignment. One shelf down, folded in a resealable bag, was the last patch her father wore before his final deployment. It showed faint water staining, the edges frayed. Next to it, tucked into a cloth sleeve, was a storm graph with notes in her mother's handwriting. Sharp lines, firm angles, and a signature looped in quiet confidence. No one had seen either item. She didn't display them. She didn't speak of them. They weren't for inspiration. They were references. Callie's exile wasn't a rejection. It was a recalibration. Her instincts didn't match the cadence of fast flights and loud footage. She didn't fly for thrill or posture. She flew to listen. And every time the air shifted, she read it like her mother taught her by feel. Rain lashed the southern wall of the hangar as the scramble team suited up. Zippers pulled tight, boots slammed down, headsets clicking into place. The air smelled of rubber and jet fuel, and something sharper metal heated by pressure. The Typhoon had veered west, then doubled back toward the coastline, bending weather models out of shape. Satellite projections lagged behind real conditions. No one said it out loud, but the screens told the truth. The wind pattern was shifting too fast to trust. Callie stood just outside the ready bay, clipboard in hand, gloves at her belt. Her vest was unzipped, no comm unit, no harness. Her name wasn't on the board. Again. She watched as a crew hauled a weapons crate toward an F-15 parked on Bravo line. The pilot leaned against the wing, helmet under one arm, grinning as he tossed a one-liner to the man securing his ladder. "They'll probably call it in another 10, he said, too wet for the glamour team. His voice wasn't meant for her, but the glance that followed was... The smirk behind it didn't last long. Across the hangar, another pilot tapped a display terminal, pulling up archived sim footage from a console in standby mode. The image on screen showed a clean, calculated approach run a mountain edge, weather pattern correction mid-climb, followed by a lateral rollback on descent. A slow maneuver. Safe. That her someone asked. The pilot nodded. Jetwash, baby. Mapped the forecast to death, flew it like she was still waiting on permission. The group watching chuckled. One nudged the edge of the console with his boot and said, "Bet she still watches this on loop. Misses the spotlight." Callie didn't move. Her name badge shifted slightly with the airflow from the bay fan. The laminated strip read, "Support" in block lettering. No rank. No call sign. Just a function. Inside the hangar command booth, a pair of ops officers leaned over the master telemetry console. One tapped the display as lines danced unevenly across the screen. "Separation shift on corridor 2, he said. "Vertical crosswind registered at 90 knots. Climb risk is too high." The other shook his head. "Hold all aircraft. 0 launches until visual exceeds 100.0 meters. The announcement echoed through the loudspeakers. "Launch postponed. Visibility below threshold. Confirm standby status." Murmurs followed, but no protest. Pilots leaned back against gear racks, annoyed but accustomed to delay. A few removed gloves and helmets. A couple walked toward the inner benches, laughing about missed flight hours and overtime credit. Callie stepped forward and opened a side terminal. The screen flickered once, then stabilized. The real-time telemetry feed showed something strange, a corridor band forming across the southern taxi arc. Narrow, unstable, but present. She adjusted the scale and watched it shift again. 30 seconds. That was all. But the window was there. She reached into her clipboard pouch and removed a folded page. It was a sketch she'd made the night before, hand-drawn vectors matching the storm drift as it closed. The lines curved across the southern pad, exactly where the corridor now flashed on screen. She held the paper steady with one hand and adjusted the telemetry angle with the other. Behind her, someone cleared his throat. "You're not cleared for that terminal." Callie turned. A crew supervisor stood beside the panel, arms folded. His tone was practiced, not harsh, but final. "You've been assigned pad inventory," he said. "Command wants full hangar documentation by mid-shift." Callie didn't argue. She closed the screen, refolded her sketch, and slipped it back into the clipboard. The supervisor added, "No need to scan the telemetry feed. That's above your review code." She nodded once and stepped aside. He watched her go, then keyed in a reset command. Down the line, the smirking pilot from earlier lifted one hand in a half-hearted salute. "You see the way she watches the radar," he said to the man beside him. "Like it's gonna apologize." The other man laughed. "Or give her a time machine." Callie walked to the far edge of the hangar. Rain streaked down the glass wall near the entry gate. Her boots squeaked slightly against the polished floor. She paused beside the tools rack and set her clipboard on a crate. With a fingertip, she tapped once on the margin of her sketch, right where the corridor had started forming. It would close soon. The wind would shift. No one else had noticed. Or maybe they had, and simply didn't trust it. She did, but trust didn't grant her access. Outside, the storm pressed against the tarmac like a living thing. Inside, her name remained absent from every manifest. Still, she watched the air, and she saw it open. Callie stepped through the open bay doors without a word. The rain struck her shoulders in a steady rhythm, soaking the collar of her vest and threading cold into the seams. The ground crew barely noticed her at first. She moved like she belonged, and that was enough to make most eyes glance, and then move on. Only one man, standing beside a fuel cart, tracked her path for more than a second. He didn't speak, just shifted his weight and lowered his headset slightly as she passed. The F-15C sat at the far end of the pad, isolated beneath a steel canopy darkened by rain. It wasn't staged for launch. Its nose was pointed slightly off axis from the others, flaps sealed, weapons rails bare. A legacy trim wrapped the tail-faded silver lines from a squadron decommissioned 3 years earlier. No name had replaced it. The ladder was already down, probably left that way after the last airshow demonstration. The rain had pooled in the canopy groove, running in lazy rivulets across the frame. Callie approached from the left side, her steps slow and deliberate. Boots, pressing water into the concrete. She stopped beneath the intake, reached up, and brushed her fingertips across the fuselage near the nose gear well. The old stencil was still there. Juliet 4, her father's bird. She climbed the ladder without rushing. The metal rungs were slick, and her gloves squeaked slightly as she gripped them. Inside the cockpit, the scent hit her immediately vinyl. Old hydraulic seals, the faint residue of ozone and coolant. She lowered herself into the seat and adjusted the harness by feel. Everything came back without effort. The straps clicked into place, the seat mold still familiar against her spine. She didn't need a checklist, but she opened the side panel anyway, removed the laminated startup log, and ran her fingers down each item. Battery power, primary avionics, fuel crossfeed, all clean. Someone had kept her prepped. The wind pressed harder against the canopy as the Typhoon narrowed its angle. She could feel the pressure drop in her eardrums. Her mother's voice surfaced in memory. Quiet, calm, always teaching. The corridor hides inside the noise. You'll never see it on the scope. You feel it. Watch the edge of the crosswind. Let the gust build, not break. That's your signal. Callie reached behind the center panel and retrieved the folded page she'd slipped in 2 weeks earlier. It was her own chart, an overlay of predicted shift zones. She slid it behind the upper console, where it rested just above the artificial horizon readout. The engines were cold. She toggled the starter with a smooth flick and waited. The low whine began to build beneath her. The bird responded like it had been waiting. On the tower channel, voices cracked through static. Hangar 3, confirm engine noise on Bravo 2. Negative manifest, Bravo 2 is non-flight. Say again who's on Juliet 4. She said nothing. No microphone clipped to her collar. No code entered. No call sign to respond with. Hydraulics pressurized. Avionics came online. The HUD flickered once. Stabilized. She checked flaps. Control surfaces twitched and leveled. She lifted the canopy lever, sealed the cockpit, and locked her helmet into position. The rain now struck the glass above her like a drum beat. Inside, everything was still. The tower escalated. Bravo. 2 is powering. Who authorized? Ground crew. Do you have eyes on the pilot? A beat of silence. Then that's not one of ours. The taxi path was narrow, and the southern tarmac slick with rain. She advanced throttle just enough to pull clear of the shadowed canopy edge, then paused. Her gloved hand rested on the throttle, fingers tight but not tense. The corridor was still there. She could see the gap not on radar, not on telemetry, but in the air itself. The clouds moved differently there. The rain struck at an angle that whispered passage. It wouldn't last. She throttled forward. The aircraft rolled, smooth and centered. No one moved to intercept. The crew chief at the far end of the pad stared, hand raised halfway to his headset, unsure whether to call or let it unfold. The bird turned and aligned with the makeshift launch lane. No other aircraft were moving. Tower to Bravo 2, abort immediately. You are not cleared. Callie eased the throttle further, nose tipping slightly as the air resistance met her forward motion. She glanced once at the instruments. Pressure nominal. Wind cross read 93 knots. Climb corridor unstable after 300 feet. She knew she only had 30 seconds. The afterburners lit. The roar hit the hangar doors like a hammer. Crew scattered from the edge of the pad as Juliet 4 lunged forward. Spray exploded behind the wheels. The nose lifted fast, sharper than regulation, but clean. The jet climbed into the storm seam, threads of cloud twisting off the wingtips like smoke torn sideways. Inside the cockpit, the sound narrowed. Engines loud, yes, but familiar. The metal skin of the airframe flexed once, then settled. The air pressure shifted. Rain fell away. Visibility cut to near zero. She kept climbing. At 400 feet, the corridor opened. Just for a moment. The world blinked into clarity. Thin bands of clear air layered between walls of pressure. Callie rode the center line. A faint shimmer of sun touched the top of the cloud layer far above. Her HUD flickered green. Wind steadied. Lift increased. The climb continued. Behind her, the base fell silent. On the tower channel, one technician whispered into his mic, unsure if his voice was being recorded. She took off, through it. No one answered. Inside the jet, Callie adjusted trim and held altitude. The cloud wall closed behind her. The corridor vanished. But she was already above it. The jet shook as the climb steepened, not from error, but resistance. The F-15C wasn't built for patience. It pushed back when held too steady, demanded speed and thrust. But Callie held the angle. Her hand on the stick didn't tighten. It guided. The canopy glass blurred with water, streaking upward as the airflow shifted. The world outside vanished into slate gray. Instruments told part of the story. The rest came through feel. She could hear the wind shift pitch just before each gust pulled at the wings. It was subtle, but familiar. Her body absorbed the translation. Slight rudder pressure. Trim adjust. 1 degree yaw hold. The inputs came not from theory, but inheritance. In storms like this, reaction time wasn't measured in seconds. It was shaped by memory. The altimeter ticked upward, 100 feet, then 120. Then the stall warning flashed for half a second false read. She corrected. Another roll pulse. The climb continued. In the tower, eyes stared at radar that gave them only fragments. Bravo 2's signal was distorted by weather scatter. The blip pulsed in and out of frame. A technician leaned in, recalibrating filters. Still no call sign. "Where is she?" someone asked. No one answered. Back in the cockpit. The noise narrowed. The storm wasn't loud anymore. It was layered. Rain became percussion. Wind. A deep hum beneath it. The jet vibrated with a tone that had always told Callie more than dials. Her father used to say you could feel the difference between safe turbulence and fatal mistake in your chest. If the wings whispered, you were fine. If they stopped whispering, you were late. She was on time. At 600 feet, the corridor opened. Not completely. Just enough. A sliver of stillness edged the cloud wall to her right. The storm curved upward and away. She angled the nose just left of climb vector and banked smoothly into the gap. The clouds split around her. Light hit the cockpit. Just for a second. Then again. She pushed higher. The aircraft bucked once, then found lift. Rain vanished. The upper layer of the Typhoon showed its teeth-white arcs of vapor curling like claw marks across the stratosphere. Callie leveled off at 1,100 feet, engine RPM steady, fuel draw balanced, all systems green. She pulled the throttle back to cruise and let the jet settle. For 3 full seconds, the world was quiet. Then she turned. The turn was wide, graceful, a descending half-loop, not for show, but alignment. She dropped altitude slowly, watching for the corridor's mouth. It was still there. The pattern was stable, but temporary. That window would close in less than a minute. Others could use it, but only if they saw it now. She keyed the secondary comm. Not tower, not flight command. The old squadron band. Juliet Channel 17. Corridor 117 is open. 30-second window. Light band stable. Topside clear at 1,100. Repeat. Corridor 117 viable. The voice was hers, but measured. Surgical. No urgency. No invitation. Just data. In the command center, the transmission cut through layered audio. Heads snapped toward the speaker. The Juliet frequency hadn't been used in 5 years. Who is that? The technician glanced at the log. No ID tag. Just open bandwidth. One of the scramble team muttered, "That sounded like her." A second voice, lower, asked, "Juliet 4. No one confirmed. The tower tried to pull telemetry but got static. She's off grid. Callie circled again. The corridor held steady. She could see the climb path from above now. The wind curled around it, forming a pressure cradle that wouldn't last, but could carry. Back on the ground, pilots watched the sky from the hangar doors. The storm looked the same, but something was different. One of the techs pointed up. There, that break. The other squinted. A flash of silver arced along the edge of the clouds, then vanished again. Inside the cockpit, Callie eased the throttle forward and took a final pass along the upper band. Her hand never left the stick. Her father's chart tucked behind the console stayed pinned where she placed it. The voice recorder blinked red in the corner of the panel. The system always logged cockpit audio, even when no one listened. She brought the jet around once more, checked the corridor again, and marked its collapse beginning near the lower edge. She keyed the comm a second time. Window closing. Recommend immediate lift for any tail alignment south side. Guidance ends now. Then she cut the transmission. Below, no one moved. Not yet. Not until the corridor fully opened again. Not until someone else risked it. But they'd heard her. And more than that. They'd believed her. Not because she wore the right patch. Not because her name was on the board. But because she had spoken in the one language that mattered: flight. Back at altitude. She adjusted heading and prepared to descend. The storm would fight her on re-entry. But she didn't need to prove anything on the return. That part had never been the point. The radar caught her signal for a heartbeat longer than expected. Someone in the tower turned and said, quietly, "She made it." No one replied. Callie didn't smile. She didn't speak. She flew. The corridor closed behind her. The wheels touched down with a low, controlled thud, almost too gentle to mark the moment for what it was. The F-15's tires skidded briefly across the soaked runway, steam rising from their contact with the still warm concrete. Reverse thrust engaged in a clean arc. No hesitation. The storm had begun to loosen its grip, and the rain fell in softer sheets now, no longer horizontal. Visibility had stretched past 100.0 meters. The corridor she flew had held long enough. Callie taxied without direction, engines humming at idle. Tower didn't speak. No flight officer barked commands. The runway lights stayed green. At the edge of the southern pad, one crewman moved quickly to clear a cable line but said nothing as she passed. Another, standing under the partial canopy, removed his headset slowly, as if unsure what world he was in now. She brought the aircraft to a full stop in the slot where it had been sitting only 40 minutes before. The canopy hissed as she unlocked it. Rain slapped across the glass and into the cockpit. She didn't flinch. Her gloves were soaked through, and her sleeves clung to her arms. She pulled the release straps on the harness, unhooked the console mic, and stepped out of the cockpit into the wind. A ladder had been placed beneath the nose wheel by the time she reached the edge. No one had spoken. She descended with the same measured calm she had carried into flight, one hand on the rail, boots striking the metal rungs with hollow finality. The sound echoed inside the hangar. No one applauded. A young tech stood off to the side with a towel in his hands. He didn't offer it, just held it loosely as she passed. She reached out, took it without a word, and wiped the inside of her palms before looping her gloves back through her belt. The walk across the tarmac was long and flat. Water filled the seams between each concrete plate, and her footsteps left small ripples in their wake. The wind had died to a steady push, and the clouds above moved with less urgency now, like they had surrendered something. From the hangar entryway, a few of the scramble team watched her return. No one blocked the path. No one stepped forward either. One of them whispered something. The others didn't respond. Inside operations, the main monitor wall displayed a split feed of radar telemetry and corridor analysis. Callie's flight path looped on the upper left quadrant, colored in pale green against the Typhoon bands. Her entry angle, her holding pattern, and her comm transmission on the Juliet band were labeled in small, flickering text. Someone had zoomed into the arc of her descent. Others were watching without speaking. A clipboard rested on the central desk, a flight manifest half-filled. One officer stood behind it, pen in hand, reading a recent printout. Without ceremony, he reached down, crossed out an empty pilot entry, and replaced it with one word, Callie. The ink hadn't dried before another monitor updated. The next launch roster showed a fresh corridor notation labeled Verified, Corridor 117, Juliet 4 Origin. Across the room, someone had pulled up her sim log. The same footage that had drawn laughter earlier now ran in slow motion, not for mockery, but for study. Pause, rewind, play. A pencil tapped slowly on the console. She entered through the side hall and stopped just inside the doorway. Her hair was matted to her temple, her boots leaving prints behind her. The towel was folded now, held loosely in one hand. Her gloves remained clipped to her belt. No one turned to greet her. But the temperature of the room changed. A silence that had once signaled disregard now held something else. Not reverence, not praise adjustment. People recalibrating, quietly. One of the instructors near the back leaned to whisper something. The man next to him asked a question in return. The instructor gave a small nod. A pilot near the front, someone who had flown the corridor earlier in training, turned toward the feed and asked, barely audible, "Did she just give us that window?" Another voice, older, replied without inflection, "She did." No one asked why. No one asked how. In the adjacent room, a junior officer typed into the report system. The after-action log had been left open, awaiting details from the tower. She copied the recorded Juliet band transmission into the entry, time-stamped it, and noted the aircraft designation, F-15C, Bravo, 2, pilot, listed as unknown. She hesitated for a moment, then she replaced unknown with Callie. No last name, just the call sign. Behind her, a staff sergeant updated the pilot board. He lifted the dry erase marker, erased the blank beside Juliet 4, and wrote the name in block letters. Then he capped the pen, and walked away. Outside, the storm began to thin. The sky shifted from iron to silver. Puddles across the launch lanes flattened out. The radar screen lit with fresh markers. Clearance granted for Flight Group Charlie. New pilots entered the room, prepping gear, unaware of what had just shifted. But the ones who had seen it, the ones who had doubted, watched quietly. In the stillness, someone near the back spoke without raising their voice. Who told her she could fly? A pause followed. Then the answer came, not bitter, not admiring, just true. Nobody. She was born in the Jetwash. Callie didn't look up. She didn't smile. She simply stepped to the edge of the board and waited. Some stories do not ask for attention. They simply hold their place until someone notices what they always were. Callie never needed permission. She did not need a spotlight or a badge of rank to see the corridor others missed. What she carried came from years of silence, of standing at the edge while others talked over her. But when the moment came, she moved not for glory, but because it had to be done. That is the strength of being unwavering, of knowing who you are when no one is watching. If this story made you pause, reflect on someone you know who moves like that quietly, steadily, and with purpose. Leave a comment to share your thoughts, or follow along for more stories like this. Not loud stories, but the kind that stay with you, the kind that speak through motion, not words.